What's up, y'all? It's a Comic Book Conservators live show. Welcome. Episode 30. I did it, y'all.
Crazy.
All downhill after that.
I am joined by my co-hosts, Phil, with 2 L's. Don't get it wrong. Phantom Restoration on Instagram and the World Wide Web. Welcome, Phil. How are you?
I'm very well.
Representing the big city.
October spirit. I see you are as well.
Yeah, the comics are down. And
Indeed.
we have a special guest host.
Indeed.
I would call him
again.
Mr. T, but he didn't go to evil doctor school to be called Mr. T. It's Dr. T. Shelby of Shelby's Comics is in the house. Welcome, Shelby. How are you?
What's up, man? I'm more excited than a fat kid in a candy store with $20 bill.
It's great to have a Louisiana native on the show because we get all that color.
Exactly.
I don't know. I feel pretty white, man. It's like I'm so washed out compared to you two.
Well,
I
usually like slap myself in the face just before coming on just to get some good, so I'm don't have like an unhealthy pallor, And then I go to makeup, so Shelby's coming at us from H-Town right here in Texas.
That's right.
Representing Shelby's Comics on YouTube and eBay and Instagram. And I'm coming to you as ever, Liberty Hill Comics, an undisclosed location in the Texas Hill Country in the Halloween spirit. I'm excited, guys.
Hey.
I am.
Before we get started, I want to say shout out to all the people that have been impacted by these 2 hurricanes back to back. Really awful. And by the way, Milton made landfall basically on top of Sarasota, CGC's in Sarasota. I do know that they were out of work for a little while, but they're back, and hope everybody at CGC isn't dealing with too much. And I did reach out to Matt Nelson, and no major damage there, but an inconvenience for sure. And a lot of even just property loss and other things going on, right? And you hate to see people having to deal with that instead of enjoying their comic books like they should be doing, right?
And grading them comic books.
Well, I don't know if you noticed.
2 days out. Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed, but I think they added either 4 or 6 days to the turnaround time because of the 2 hurricanes.
Yeah.
I don't have books there right now, so nope, I did not know.
One of those instances where we're probably not going to bellyache about it too much because obviously they're going through quite a bit, and we want them a speedy recovery. But let's do some shout outs before we get into our exciting show. Welcome Hugo Danner, my buddy Mike. How you doing? He says, hope everyone's doing great. Huge Submariner fan since '66. Love Bill Everett's art and inks too. Bill Everett, freaking genius. Actually, I think, I've said this before, but of all of the Marvel Silver Age first appearances, Daredevil #1 is by far the best. And I think it's not an accident that it's because Bill Everett was involved. I mean, it was also a little bit later in the Silver Age. Stan had been through the iteration a few times, and maybe Stan was better as well. But it's hands down the best origin story and the best done #1 in the Marvel Silver Age, in my opinion. And Bill Everett, genius, Anyway, welcome, Mike. The Professor Peter Alachi's here from Experiments in Conservation. Says hi to everybody. I have some Silver Age Submariner, including #1. Fun.
Nice.
That Iron Man in Submariner #1 for me was like a touchstone book. That's kind of fun too, because I collected, of course, the Tales to Astonish that led into it. So Neri Nan is here. Welcome. Don Carter, one of our regulars. Good evening from Tampa. I hope you didn't have too much drama in Tampa, Don, with the weather situation. And Ben Stewart as well. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you here.
Yeah.
Feel very fortunate to be here with you and my co-hosts. One other little bit of... well, I think I'll do that later, actually. Let's jump right into our book of the week, our fair market value segment. This was fun. We were fortunate to get this book on the right to go to auction. This just sold in the last month. It's a conserved Submariner Comics #1 from spring of 1941. Kind of amazing. So Submariner on the cover, the Angel on the cover, not a first appearance, but a big key, and a Schomburg. We haven't had a Schomburg in a little while. We also haven't had a Timely book in a little while. Timely, of course, is the name for what became later Marvel Comics. The name during the Golden Age was Timely Publications or Timely Comics. And then the Universal 6.0 on the left sold less than a year ago. So we have these two books. It's a pretty rare book, so we're fortunate that we actually have a touchstone in the marketplace against which to compare the conserved book that sold this week. So I'm pretty excited to get into this one. We haven't done like one of these in a while, like I said. So what do you guys think? We haven't talked about it. What do you think of the choice here? Because there were actually a lot of conserved books sold in the last month. It hasn't always been true, but lately it's been not that I can't find a book to talk about, but it's sometimes difficult to choose one book to talk about.
Yeah. I'm nostalgic for this title because like growing up, my dad had a couple nice copies from this title. And like nice high grade copies too, because he was collecting in like the 90s when
when this material was available.
And I had a number 18 myself, a sub 18. That was a respectable, probably a 4.0, like a nice VG copy. But I was always drawn to like the Timelies and like ECs specifically. So this cover I always thought was very cool, even though it wasn't a first appearance. It's one of those things where you can get away with it in comics, where you just have Submariner as big as he is there. It's like the scale. The scale only works here. Like you couldn't really do that in live action. It was kind of funny.
No, it's the genius of Schomburg too, and all of the detail. I mean, he was the original sort of George Perez, right? Yeah. And of course, Nazis, swastika cover.
The wartime aspect I was always very aware of, because he was always really into war memorabilia in general. So I was like thinking, damn, like kids were reading these on the stands when the war was going on, or some of them they were finding out about it before we were even in the war. So that to me is like the historical aspect.
We talk about Captain America punching Hitler on the cover well before the United States entered the war. It's important to say this is Submariner overturning a Nazi U-boat well before we were in the war, right? Yeah, this is published spring of 41. Pearl Harbor happens December of 41. And, so that means they basically wrote this a year before we entered the war. Timely were not afraid. The war obviously was already happening in Europe, but Timely in America, there was still a big debate whether or not we should enter this war. And in fact, at the time, the thought was we shouldn't. Popular opinion at the moment was we shouldn't, which is why we were not yet involved in this conflict. And Timely took a stand. They were culturally relevant. And that's another thing that I love about this book. I mean, again, with the lag between when it was written and when it was published, this was written and drawn about a year before Pearl Harbor. And here they are saying, like, the good guys need to be battling the Nazis because they're clearly the enemy, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's got that invasion of Britain there on the cover. So that kind of gives you a little bit of timeline. And I want to point out that even though this is about 20 years before we think of Marvel Comics, notice that it says there, a Marvel comic. special feature, right? They were using that name way back in the early 40s, even though they're considered Timely, then Atlas, then Marvel Comics.
Great point. Yeah. So their flagship was Marvel Comics, which was an anthology, and Marvel Comics #1 was the first appearance of Submariner. This is in the same way that at this time, DC technically was national, but they had the DC Bullet, and they often said a DC, a Superman comic, because their flagship was Detective Comics, which again was an anthology at the time. But great point. I actually didn't notice that about this cover, so I appreciate you bringing that up. So in terms of the census, interesting book. We've talked about those books that are sub 100 universal copies being, especially for big keys, being a special group unto their own. This one's outside of that. As we mentioned, no first appearance, and just a bit under 100 universal copies, about twice the universal copies as Tech 27, almost 3 times as many as All-American 16. But a very desirable book nonetheless, right? A #1 pre-war Schomburg cover, Submariner in his own title. This was only the second Marvel comic where somebody got their own title after Cap 1. Serious book, no cap.
I see what you did there.
148 all grades, and just 4 conserved. So this, again, it's so difficult to find good fair market value conversations because there are so few of these books conserved, even though CGC's been awarding the conserved label for over a decade now. So I was thrilled to see this one change hands, like I said, in the last year. Median grade a 5.5, but look at the distribution of the grades here. It's just so choppy and all over the place, right? There's like almost no 4.5s for some reason, and then you have a bunch of 4s, a bunch of 5s. There's a bump in the restored. There's 8 7.5 restoreds out there, right? So kind of a wild and kind of a wild distribution here. Actually, how many signature books? It's just one, the one, right? Yeah. It's covered up by part of the logo for me, unfortunately. But let's do our Touchstone Universal book first. So here's a beautiful book. Presents nicely. Honestly, presents a little better than a 6.0 to me from arm's length here.
Yeah, it looks like an 8.
Yeah, looks like a 7 or an 8, depending, right? I do see a scuff there on the back. But... yeah, we're about to take we'll take a closer look here. So this particular one was slabbed back in 2012. So 12 years ago, does that impact how it was graded? Maybe. We had a little conversation about that last week. And in fact, I had some follow-up with some viewers during the week. Cream to off-white pages. The centerfold is detached. I think that is part of what keeps it at 6. Now, technically, I think you can still grade at least 7. Can you still grade 8 with a detached centerfold, Phil? Are you sure?
The book is otherwise perfect.
It would have to be otherwise perfect, right? So it's taking probably like you're starting at now an 8 if everything else is perfect. You got cream pages, so now you're probably down to a 7. It doesn't take an accumulation of very many more defects before you're a 6. So let's see what they have to say. Back cover foxing, front cover foxing, interior centerfold detached, left center whole book wormholes. Okay. I did not see that. Spine light wear. We do see the light wear, but
I think it's on the pages. I have several, 1 or 2 books from that era, and they don't seem to get into the cover. They go right down through the pulp. So I know
So
Larry
I
had one
think it's
that it went through the cover, but
yeah, I think it's an honest 6 that presents quite well, right?
Yeah.
Any
I can even
guesses?
see a 7.
So
beautiful.
No.
So this one hammered about a year ago. Any guesses on the price?
Shelby, I'll let you go first.
I mean, it's got to be at least 20,000, I would think.
Okay.
So my mind,
correct.
I know, it's this book. I think for a long time was worth less than it is now. I don't want to say undervalued.
I agree,
but I'll say it was less, and I think that's because rightly it's not a first appearance. It's the first issue in the title. It's a significant character, but Subby doesn't have the same kind of appeal as Captain America or someone like that. So it's desirable, but that was always kind of capped. But in today's post 2020 market, I think a book like this being a timely #1, and timely is that look like they got run over with the truck go for $1,000. I would imagine a Subby 1. Yeah, I could see a book like this now going for 25 or 30K.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll correct you at the risk of being overbearing and say timelies that look they got run over by a truck sell for $2,000 to $4,000, not $1,000. I mean, timelies are nuts. Really? The buyers for timelies are nuts.
Yeah,
in my opinion, I don't own any Golden Age timelies, mostly because I just feel like they've always been overpriced relative to some of the other great books of the Golden Age. And I know that's because the demand is there. I do think it's partly because when people that now have a lot of disposable income were kids, they were huge fans of the X-Men, Chris Claremont and Marvel comics, and even like, McFarlane and Spider-Man and that stuff. And, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a period there in the 90s when the X-Men and Spider-Man were so huge that the fair market value of Marvel Comics #1 actually eclipsed that of Action #1. And I think that one of the sort of carry-ons from that is that the entry level, the ante to get into these books has never really come back down to earth. And the timelies, again, for me, are just kind of nutty.
I agree.
Do you think they have been overvalued? Or do you think everything else, primarily DC, were undervalued? Well, I think the market, I don't want to say the market is always right, but I think the market is right most of the time. So I will say they look overvalued to me. But actually, I will also say some of the DCs and other great keys in the Golden Age look undervalued to me. So it's probably a little of both. That said, I'm not ranting about the market. Like, I recognize there's demand for this, and that's why the price is where it is. For me, it's not like the amount of money I would spend on this. There are big DC keys I'd rather have, So welcome, by the way. Our RS Cali. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Hey. So 20 or 25 to 30, the answer is 31.2 after the buyer's premium. This was a heritage auction that hammered, like I said, less than a year ago, but almost a year ago. Pretty strong price, I think. Good solid price for this book.
Yeah. I mean, without the buyer's premium, that'd be about 24.
Probably so. RS Kelly also says a great cover, and I have to agree with that. I mean, this is. I think we're all fans of Schomburg, and I think Schomburg did covers for the Neater publications, and he did covers, on into the Atomic Age under the name Zila that were, like airbrushed. He did all kind of stuff, bunch of crazy stuff. The guy was literally an artistic genius, but I do think his timely wartime covers are a cut above, and they're one of the reasons why people are rabid for those timelies, right? Yeah. So again, no disrespect meant, this is a strong price for a great book. It just wouldn't be where I would put 30 grand if I were putting it into Golden Age books. Now, that's our benchmark. Here's our book, our conserved book. In terms of how it presents here, let's actually go back to the opening slide. Let's just look at the colors here. Again, on the right, this is, so on the left is Heritage's image. On the right, that's actually CGC's image, because this book has been slabbed recently since CGC started photographing the more valuable books that they slab. I feel like the Heritage book is a bit oversaturated. Somebody cranked up the saturation on the imaging, frankly. I don't, because Submariner's skin doesn't look right. The reds don't look right to me. That said, I could be wrong, and maybe the conserved book is just a little bit faded. Hard to say. I would say this, though. They both have strong color strike. The one on the right, the conserved book, I mean, if you look at the red in Submariner and the black, you still have amazing contrast there. I think, frankly, the one on the left looks a little garish to me. And again, whether that's editing in photo or whether it really looks like that in real life, I don't know. I kind of prefer the look of the conserved book, but I could see somebody saying, no, I like the really intense one.
Yeah, I'm on the other side myself, just with the reds, even if they're oversaturated a little bit.
It's like, just that the Submariner's skin doesn't look right to me. It's so red, but
I think that's just by contrast too. I feel like if you couldn't see the one on the right, then I wouldn't even notice that person.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's definitely in this imaging more intense.
But I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. The professor says the label on the right is bluer. Yes, but it's the new label, so I think that fade from dark blue to white is more intense in the older label. So I'm not sure that is an indicator for us here, Professor.
I usually look at the white in the label to see, when I worked at one of the auction
to see about
houses,
the color correction.
What we would do for the scan is make that true white, and then that would make the scan as close as possible to the realistic number. So if I look at that, it looks kind of off.
Right. Good point. Great pointer. Okay, so again, from arm's length, this one also presents really well. I do see a little bit of damage in the upper left corner. And let's get into the grader's notes here. So 6.0, cream to off-white, so same page quality. Graded just earlier this year. Conserved, obviously. Conservation includes interior reinforced, staples replaced. Grader's notes include chip out left top of front cover. That's the one I already pointed out. Ink lift left center front cover. I don't know if we see the ink lift. It might be left center. Not sure I see it, but creasing to cover, interior reinforced, small multiple tear, center of spine, staples replaced. To me, this is an odd grouping of defects because if you're going to be conserved anyway, why didn't you fix the spine split?
Maybe they thought that it was. Maybe they thought it wasn't going to come back conserved, and what they did.
I think they thought they were going to.
Well, they can't notice that, so it'll come back blue label, and then it didn't.
I think
the picture I would paint.
That or somebody bought it not knowing the work that was done and subbed it thinking it was going to be universal.
That's the other scenario.
What that tells me is there's probably meat on the bone here because clearly the spine splits were counted as defects, counted against the grade here. If you do nothing else and you just do tear seals on those spine splits, it seems like you get a bump here. How much of a bump, I'm not sure, but I don't think any of the other defects hold this all the way down to a 6. This feels more like this is a potential 7 or 8 to me. Between 7 and 8. 8, I think would be a generous golden age 8. I think
I would say that. I mean, my mind goes the exact opposite way. I'm looking at it being like, that's all that was done was the reinforcement and the staples replaced. So to me,
why not roll it out?
Work,
right.
This is I mean, I think a worst case of probably a 4.0 detached cover if the staples were originally rusted out or something like that. But if this could be a blue label and maybe the cover stays attached, I mean, there's a lot of potential here, I think, to convert this back to a blue label.
Yeah, I think you could create equity either in finishing the conservation or undoing it. Yeah. Absolutely. I agree with you. And by the way, I don't think they're not opposites ideologically. They're just opposite directions to take the project, right? Like
I
both of them create equity.
Do the conservation to get this up to a 7.5, like you said, because you could look at it and say, actually, it makes more sense to just seal a few tears. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? And if it was my book, maybe I would choose a difference. I think I'm biased because of mostly what my clients desire. So like I think about it like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked about this before. I mean, your company is called Phantom Restoration, but you, as a percentage of your time, you probably spend less than 10% doing restoration, right? You do more restoration removal. Yeah, you do more restoration removal than restoration, and you do more conservation than either.
I feel the CGC is a little overly harsh on staples being replaced.
No, it's an interesting conversation. Shelby and I were talking offline in the last week about manufacturing new staples versus replacement with vintage staples, as CGC insists you must do.
Yep.
You know, they don't tell you that if you're going to leaf cast, you have to take old comic books and grind them up to make your pulp, right? Like you get to make new pulp. If you're doing a conserved book, at some point in the future, we run out of period staples. And why are we butchering old books? It's already a conserved book. I would say there should be a standard to which you can manufacture staples with appropriate materials and replace them and still get conserved grade. I don't actually know what CGC's position on that would be. Clearly, this says staples replaced, but I think that might be asterisk with period correct staples.
Shelby.
Nevertheless, I agree with you.
Shelby, can I ask when you say that, like, is that just in your experience you found that they're difficult with books saying replace staples?
Yeah, I really have no basis. It's just I feel that I was trying to remember. They usually knock off like a good grade point or something, right?
Well, usually replace staples. You cannot be in universal. So the biggest problem is you're being pushed into conserved or restored, which is fine. But then they have further that they only allow the period correct staples, as opposed to, like I said, like a period correct material and make a fresh staple, which I think
maybe that's what I was thinking of, is that if you replace the staples, it automatically throws you into a restored, or used to throws you into a restored category.
I think if it was only staples, it probably would. But if you have other work that qualifies as conserved, then it's conserved.
Yeah, because we saw a book a couple of weeks ago that the only conservation was staples replaced, and I'm like, dude.
Right.
Yeah. I'm over here. Thank you.
I mean, I do recognize that there are people that want it the way that it was born, and that, you know, a big part of CGC is verifying that it was born with these staples. I totally get that. I'm just saying, if we are going to allow replacement, I think we ought to have more latitude. But I'm not for lowering the bar with respect to original staples. For those that are collecting period correct pieces, they want those original. I do not blame them at all, and I think CGC plays an important role here. So yeah, I think that this book has opportunity to go either direction. What do we think it hammered at? Where are we guessing?
I'm going to go at...
So Universal went at 31.2.
I'm gonna go at 14.
14.
Yeah, sadly, that's what I was thinking too. Was around 14.
Well, you should go
12
either
to
the
14.
1399 or the 1401,
And
right?
no, I'm thinking 12 to 14.
Okay,
Oh,
so
you're
you're
just
under
under
it.
me.
So you're
Okay.
going to say 1399?
There
I
you
could
go.
see that. I could take
13,999?
111 too. Yeah. But
I'd say 11. 11.
Shelby doesn't know how to play the game. It's Shelby, you're guessing 13,999. I'm trying to help you here. That's your
Okay.
guess.
I'm guessing
You're guessing 11.
$11,995.
Okay.
ooh,
It's a mystery.
is it? Oh, you can figure that out. You can
Is
solve that.
it?
Hey, zing bazinga.
14.5. So I feel like this was on eBay with an ask of 17,000, and just this month, or just last month, somebody negotiated a 14.5 sale with the seller here, and they probably referenced the universal sale from a year ago. Yep. And said something to the effect of conserved is worth half off plus the market's weak. Yep. So 14.5, and the seller acquiesced here.
I mean,
that's what I would have done.
What's the price of a 4.0 universal? And I was thinking about 14. That was where I went.
Yes, except here's something wild. I tried to find a would you rather book here, but there was a 4.0 that sold 2 years ago for 30 grand or just under. And then there was a 4.5 that sold a year ago for 16. So there was just too much volatility in the pricing
understandable. Yep.
for me to do a rational would you rather.
Yep.
So what that means is 46% of the universal price. So, half off haircut. I think for a book that has upside potential, that's well bought. That's my opinion on it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. I think it's. I know that you like to include the buyer's premium as part of the.
Well, the price is the price.
Price, right? I think it's the 24,000 plus. Then you had the buyer's premium, right? Like I bought it at 24,000. Then Heritage stuck me with a 20% buyer premium, right?
It's not how much they get paid for it; it's how much someone is willing to pay. So the buyer themselves plus sales tax pays.
Yeah, go collect and the other collators of data, they all use the price after. They don't do taxes and shipping, so it's always plus taxes and shipping. Yeah. But they always include buyer's premiums and that sort of stuff in the price. So
I get where you're coming from.
For consistency, that's what I always do.
Yeah, but if you were to take off and say it was 24,000, then this would be close to 55, 60% of value or something.
That's just what the person was thinking when they clicked bid, but it's not.
That's why they show it like that. Yeah, to incentivize.
That's why they be doing that to you.
You're like, oh man, I'm paying more.
So anyway, that was fun. I think I'd rather have the conserved book. I mean, it really had a very light touch to it. And in this instance, the would you rather is, would you rather have the book on the left and be 30,000 out of your bank account, or would you rather have the book on the right and be 14,000, 15,000 out of your bank account?
Yeah.
Personally, I'd rather have the book on the right. I think it's got more upside potential and it presents really well, and conserved books don't bother me. And it's already been conserved, so I could do some additional work to it without wrecking any equity in it, and vis-a-vis it being, universal when I receive it. So the sort of modified would you rather here is at the hammer prices, which one would you rather have? And I'd rather have the one on the right for 14 than the one on the left for 30 personally.
For sure.
Yeah.
My only caveat would be, because I don't know this book that well, is I would want to do a little research to see if I could find how scarce it is with those reds, and if most of them look like the one on the right. Because if that is the case, and it's like a fiction house book, where if you know certain fiction house books, it's the color strike is almost as important, sometimes more important than the technical
than the grade.
So that could be something where if you could look and be like, wow, copies of this sit because people are waiting for one with brighter reds.
Sure.
And the other ones just sit.
That's a thing. That's a thing in certain books.
But that said, I'm in the same camp with you guys for how it sits.
All right. Starman's with us too. Welcome, David. How are you? Hope you're doing well. Groovy. Well, that was fun.
Sweet pick.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. And I want to clarify too, real quick, in case anybody else was confused about Staples being replaced. So I'm looking at CGC and it says that either Staples replaced with period correct Staples or removed clean and then, put back, all get conserved grades. So I did not know that. If you replace the Staples, like non-period correct and all that, then you get a qualified grade.
Interesting. Peter says you can fix spine split on the conserved and get a 7 or 7.5. That's right where I'm at. My brain is at too.
Yeah, that would be cool.
That's part of why I prefer that one. All right, let's do a little palate cleanser before we move to segment 2. And this is last week to vote, guys. And Comic Book Community Awards finalists, the voting closes, I believe it's going to be Friday, but it's definitely this week. So last chance to get your vote in. We are, as I've mentioned before, thrilled and humbled to be included as a finalist here, Liberty Hill Comics and Tall Cotton among these other fine channels. By the way, shout out to Jerry the Jitterbug. He celebrated 4 years on YouTube this week.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, congratulations, Jerry. It's been fun watching the ride, and we appreciate everything you've taught us and all of the entertainment. Thank you, and looking forward to 4 more and then many more. So, as I've said before, please go out and vote for somebody. It's really easy. There's a link in the description. Follow the link. Go vote. We are the 22nd block on the ballot. If you want to just scroll down and vote for one of these channels. Nobody here is getting rich doing this content creation. They're doing it for the love of the community and to share their passion with you. So please go and help them get some recognition for it. And with that, let's jump into our second segment. Phil, this is a book you worked on and you wanted to share with us the befores, the afters, the final results, and some of the foibles in between. So I am excited to hear about this directly from you. Take it away.
Oh, thanks. So this is really one of those books where it was it was on a budget. It was just to kind of, for the owner's preference, they didn't mind the conserved grade, but it wasn't going all out. It was just to kind of do some minimal conservation work. And it is, I don't know, I've always really liked this title. So if you're not familiar with it, Planet Comics, it's like one of the earliest or the very first science fiction devoted comic book.
And the earliest ones have the planet, the title, the trade dress is riveted, right?
Yeah.
And some people really are like, the Rivet Planet collectors. But really all the way through the period, because the Golden Age ends with the Atomic Age, which really is a sci-fi bent. So Planet Comics is kind of on point all the way through the Golden Age, whereas some of the other books lose their way.
Yeah. And the Planet, what I love is the Planet comic covers have a very pulp cover feel to them. I think most all of them have like some kind of female on the cover, and it's just a very pulp kind of artwork.
Yeah, the first like several issues were like almost taken from other sci-fi pulp cover, so they were
So
just
Fiction
kind of,
House,
they were reused quite a bit of
yeah, Fiction House published a bunch of
Pulp.
sci-fi pulps, right?
They did.
yeah.
So they had already in-house talent, and they knew this game. So that's why they were first to sci-fi comics, and why they were so prevalent and had such a high standard.
Yeah, and so this issue particularly I really like because it's one of the very kind of rare instances of a female artist from this time period. So she's very well known. Lily Renee is her name, and she did the cover and the first story in this issue.
That's awesome.
Which is pretty sweet. And then also, just as like a side note, when I was looking this up in Grand Comic Database, which is a great resource, by the way, anyone watching, comics.org, you can go on there. It's really great. In addition to Comic Book Plus, both of those are good resources if you're trying to check page counts for books that you think might be missing a story page or an ad page or something like that. They detail everything. It's really comprehensive. So when I was looking at that for this issue, and forgive me because I don't get a chance to peruse every book I'm working on. I don't read them all. But in this one, in a few of the stories, one is drawn by Lee Elias, who those know is like very famous for his horror and war content that he made in like the 50s. And then another legend, Murphy Anderson.
Wow.
So it's pretty cool how, guys like that were drawing this book, this early on, because this is wartime still too. This would have been on stands in like January 45, so it's pretty crazy.
Absolutely.
And to that point, wartime comic. This is a single staple book, so this is that.
Oh
that is
yeah,
a detail. This was a time at war where they were conserving so much metal. Books were printed with one staple to conserve metal for shell casings
for the war effort. Yeah.
So again, this was just kind of an easy conservation job. There's no wet cleaning. It was just, again, I think I mentioned this in the last show. If you're learning leaf casting, I think that's awesome. I would also say, though, if you don't know how to do tear seals, reinforcement, standard mending, stop what you're doing and just put it to the side and still do it, but learn that first, because it's going to help you understand the paper more. And it's just a good tool to have in your arsenal, because there's going to be books sometimes where, due to time or cost, it just makes sense just to do the less is more.
Yeah, these are the fundamentals. It's like if you're trying to learn how to play basketball, you practice dribbling, you don't practice dunks, right? Like that's just the boring truth of like developing skill sets to do this stuff. You got to develop your fundamental skills, your basic skills. You're going to spend 90% of your time working on books is going to be doing that stuff. So focus on that stuff early and get your skills sharp.
Yeah, and I want to comment real quick because I noticed that it was a Lily Renee cover also. She only died 2 years ago, and she was 101 years old.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
And she escaped Austria when the Nazis invaded in 1938. She was 14. So that means she did this cover when she was 21 years old.
Yep.
Wow.
So
people grew up a lot faster back in the day than they do now.
Yeah, well, you had to.
Pretty crazy. Just look at that cover again. A 21-year-old drew that. Look at all the shadowing on the figure.
It's amazing.
I don't know if it was a dig where she was kind of throwing high-heeled boots on what looks like a demon German soldier, but I digress. So the work performed here, I'll show some before and afters, but just to detail it here. So it was just a disassembly, dry clean the cover, tear seals to cover. There was a tiny piece reattached to the cover, which I'll show. Then reinforcement to the cover and interior. One thing I didn't note here was the slight spine roll on the interior was reversed. Then the book was reassembled, humidified, and given a final press. So to detail some of that before the nitty-gritty before and afters, this is one of those details that I think is really important to know. Know you can get away with it, know you can do it. It's just maximizing what's there. So on the left, you see the picture there. You can see basically the staple is blown out. That's the cover. The cover's detached. And then that picture.
Again, there's one staple. So
correct. Yep.
One staple blown means cover detached.
Yeah. So that little piece of paper you see there was underneath the staple when I removed it from the interior. So I saved that, and then I very, very carefully there with my micro spatula and brush reopened the color that was just on the topmost layer of paper that had folded over there, if you really look there. And then I had that piece that's part of the cover that's missing. And that piece fits perfectly in like a jigsaw puzzle. So you can see on the left, I have the piece on the micro spatula just sitting there waiting to go in. And on the right, I mean, there's some color break, but that looks a hell of a lot better than just some layered mending tissue to reinforce it where you can see there's something missing. Why not use the original if you have the original?
Yeah, beautiful.
Exactly. And go back, Phil, because I'm so impressed. If you look at that top, if you look at the picture of the top piece, you know, because you were saying you took that little bitty paintbrush and reopened, you know, I mean, that's amazing work in itself, because I've had to do that. I used a paintbrush that small, but yeah, trying to peel back where what I call foldovers, right? To expose that color again is very tedious, very tedious work. And bravo to what you can do with just like a small paintbrush and some magnifying glass and some patience. Hello, Jack.
Yeah.
Jack's made an appearance. And speaking of a small paintbrush, I mean, this is a small paintbrush. Is this like a
paintbrush.
Double aught or something? This is one of those paintbrushes that has like 10 hairs in it or something.
Yeah, it's one of those that we would do with miniature painting. That's what we put the eyes, the dot
put the
for
eyeball the on the wizard.
So I got this before they closed at one of my favorite art stores here in the city, Da Vinci. And I go to Blick now and get everything I need, and they have it. But this was a 10-0 brush. This is easily this is my most used brush easily. This tool, these three tools, four, just to show my full arsenal. Micro spatula, curved X-Acto knife blade that I'll switch out for a pointed blade sometimes. A set of tweezers.
Yep.
And then this brush. And I have other brushes. I have other tweezers. I have other micro spatulas and other blades. But those are the primary ones that I'll use for many
those
jobs.
are your favorites, just like we all end up with favorites.
This is something you would never really think you'd use going into this work as a little brush. But for what you're dealing with, and even knowing, I remember looking at some of the earliest jobs. Like if I were to look at that piece of paper before I folded the cover over, my eye wouldn't have been trained to know that that's color underneath folded over paper. I just would have thought it was all color loss, because you're looking at such a small, you only kind of know by starting to be like, is there anything here? Oh, look, it's starting to peel up. And then you reinforce with a little methyl cellulose, and then you're like, cool, it's stable now. I don't have to worry about moving it, and all of a sudden that flakes off. And then you go to grab it again, and you're like, what happened to my paper? You know, like that's not what you want. You have to be, we're dealing with this is an almost 80-year-old piece of paper that had come off and was hiding underneath the staple in the book. It's not like,
beautiful.
It's very delicate.
Yeah, beautiful work so far.
Amazing stuff. Amazing.
I'm excited to see the rest.
Yeah, y'all better be taking notes here.
And then there's just little things here, like there's a before and after on the spine. You can see the spine roll is gone onto the cover, and then I was able to do the same thing there where I just folded back over all that paper on the left that it was just color that it folded over, and just stabilized it and put it back down. So it's not perfect, but it looks much better than it did before.
Absolutely.
And then here's just a picture of that same area again, but before and after with the staple actually reinserted. And then there's other little things you can see on the left. The raking light shows that crease right underneath the number 35 that's flattened out now and flush.
Fiction House did some cool stuff, man.
This I always like.
Oh, look at it here!
It's so satisfying seeing that nice full, like the You know when you open up a book and you see how flush it is and it's a tight, the staple is reinforced here. This is as stronger than it was when it was first published. You can make the argument. So,
and is that the Lily Renee story? Is the opening story? Is that her art?
It sure is.
Wow.
I would say of all the Golden Age books, Planet Comics, in my opinion, routinely had some of the best art. When I'm flipping through and looking, I mean, really, like you have, unless I'm mistaken, like Matt Fox has some interiors, but I mean, you're already talking Lee Elias and Murphy Anderson. Those aren't schmucks. There's a reason that those guys were working in the industry 10 years after this still. So it's, it's cool stuff.
No, they really did.
And I noticed also, if you go back, so is that a water stain there at the top, and that wasn't right. I wanted two things I want to point out. One is there's a water stain, but two, hey, a lot of people's first inclination is you need to get rid of that, but I think that is an acceptable defect given a lot of criteria with this cover. So, I wanted to point out that as conservators, and I think you made this comment last week, Phil, we really need to think about the ethics of our conservation work and whether it should be done or not done and what is best for the book. And I agree. I think leaving that bit of a stain is what's best.
I mean, in this case, it really just was kind of a budget kind of, the guy had sent in a big group. I told him for this, I could do this work, but it would land at a conserved holder. And he said, that doesn't bother me really. I've had the book for a while and I like the book. But then part of it was, well, if that's the case, this is the budget for this. And then it was just to kind of keep it at a, under a certain amount.
Oh my God.
One thing about being conservative in the work is that if someone changes their mind, they can always come back and clean that, right? We could always remove the water stain later, but if we, once it's removed, it can't be put back, right? So it's always best to sort of do less.
I do, again, it's been mentioned, but I do toe the line of, a lot of people are looking to get books that have work totally reversible. So it just, we're still on that precipice where there are some people that are like that, and it's totally understandable. So that's
absolutely. It's their book.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Jack.
So here's the final before and after, just the front cover.
So what was the deal with the writing in the N on Planet?
Yeah, that's one of those cases where I try to address this as much as I can. There's just like tape removal in my experience, writing is never a guarantee. Even pencil, I've encountered pencil before where it's just whoever put it in was pushing so hard down. It's like the fibers were basically broken. You're never going to totally remove it. So sometimes in those cases, I think it's better just to leave it there. But also, you don't. It's just like the tape removal. You don't know if color is going to come up until you start doing it. Sometimes, even if you do spot tests.
Yeah.
So there's a line you kind of have to toe, and in this instance, it was, I mean. I thought it was going to all come off, but the idea was to at least minimize it as much as possible.
Yeah. I think it's improved. I'll tell you my opinion on this. What I really don't like to see is if you attempted to erase it and you actually removed some of the yellow so I could see that it was erased and then you still didn't get all of it. That I think looks awful.
Yeah.
But the fact that the yellow looks intact and you've lightened that, to me, it's definitely improved. I would have gone the same direction that you ended up going here.
I agree.
And I'm sure that was a conversation with the owner as well.
Yeah. And that's part of the other thing I mentioned last time too. It's so easy to overdo erasing on these books. And once you do it, you'll always see it. And when you're approaching something like that, in my mind that wants it to be perfect, I keep trying to go at it with different erasers. It's so easy to, in one of those times, you're not being as patient as you should be, and then all of a sudden you just go that millimeter over, and then all of a sudden you take yellow off, and then it's done. You already did it, so you have to exercise the restraint. So these will always bug me, seeing something like that, being like, it didn't all come off, but at least I didn't remove the yellow, so it is sometimes just
No,
yeah.
I think
Yellows and light blues are so susceptible, and recently with that Foremost comic that I did, you can still see the pencil marks, but if I had tried to take any more off, I would have started removing ink, and so it's best just to stop. Give a quick shout out to Gerald Yates that came over from my channel.
Yeah, welcome.
Welcome.
One of my
Jimmy's here too.
Is getting with the spine flush again. It's just a subtlety where you look on the left and how it's, the spine got a lot of damage there from how its orientation was, but then once it got wrapped back around on the right, once the spine roll was taken out, a lot of those defects are on the back cover now. So from the front, the eye appeal is subtly much better.
It totally is, but we also lose that little bit of red.
I like
the window.
Yeah.
Part of it was that the cover was literally loose from the interior on the left. Yeah. No, much improved. It's subtle to say, if you were to say, well, tell me exactly how it's improved. It's you have to look carefully, but just at arm's length, you look at them. The one on the right looks a lot better, right?
And then this is you can actually see that stain a lot more apparent on the top. That's one of the other things too with staining, especially on a book of this age. Just like tape removal, and you can test the paper enough, and you can have a general idea if you'll have a high success rate with a little color loss. But with staining, if you've washed books enough, sometimes the stain just isn't going to always come all the way out.
Right.
Sometimes it will dramatically improved, and it does. Sometimes it looks subtle and you can still kind of see something was there. Other times it's like what did someone grind it? It's like it just doesn't want to come out. So with the idea of wanting to keep the costs down and the work reversible, especially in this case, that stain looked a little questionable to me anyway. So especially on a book of this age, because
the paper almost looks friable up there. Yeah.
And
I love the corny ass, like, now you can lick any auto repair job. Why am I licking a job again? Right? Like the little aphorisms and the different use of English from even just, our grandparents' time cracks me up.
And I'd be so careful with like washing this. Like, I'm not sure if I would chance it because of the blues, pinks, and yellows. Those are so susceptible to color loss.
If it was my book, I know I would go after it, but
Oh yeah. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it, but I just say that there is definitely a higher risk involved with it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. But big improvement.
And I'm not that familiar with Fiction House. Like, we understand that different companies have some different paper quality.
Yeah. So that's just really it for this. It's not a lot more of the books I do work like this on are generally higher value books, and that's not to say anything ill about this book here. Just more a low cost kind of. Just to get the cover reattached and a few other little things, nothing crazy.
They're not all Planet Comics 1, but they're all important to somebody.
Yeah, and so I'm just getting like in terms of like equity increased again in this case, in the owner's mind, it really wasn't about necessarily increasing the equity here. It was just about having a book that was preserved and conserved, and they didn't have the cover detached and the slab moving around because they wanted to get it graded. And at least it's in a better state for future collectors. That's the idea.
Yeah, no, I think this is an excellent example of less is more, and how us as conservators, definitely should take note and and as a lesson of what you did here, Phil. So amazing.
Hugo Danner's a Marine. He never saw a job he couldn't lick.
Someone thinks they can take you in arm wrestling. Have you ever seen his arms? His arms bigger than my leg.
Well, do I need to?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Let's go.
Thanks.
I'll see you at the Collector Summit. Actually, I'm not arm wrestling anybody at the Collector Summit. I'm 52 years old. I don't need to prove how strong I am to anybody anymore. But the professor says Planet Comics are pretty good in water. That's good to know.
Good to know. See?
Yeah. So, Phil, thanks for sharing that with us.
Amazing.
Mike, we know that was the old Timex watch commercials. They take a licking and keep on ticking.
That's great.
Oh, man. I mean, how many of those jingles are just seared into our consciousness? So we do have a few questions from the Facebook group, and let's throw that up, and we'll take maybe another 10, 15 minutes of question time, and then we can call it an evening here. So while we're at it, let's just plug our group. If this isn't enough comic book conservation content for you, run on over to our Facebook group, the Comic Book Conservation Community. Join there. We are a close-knit, supportive group, very collaborative, and we'd love to have you there. We'd love to have you sharing your work and getting some feedback if that's what you're looking for. And if not, just some kudos for a job well done. So I have a few questions. And I am thinking we got partway through these. No, these are fresh. Yeah, these are fresh. Okay. So why don't we just jump into them? These are a few from Adrift here on YouTube, Jason Vondero, as he is in the real world. When using blue light, is it ever best to spot treat rather than doing the whole page at the same time? Personally, I do entire pages, but I will tell you that I sometimes use the light really close to the page, and I'll center it over a stain or something. But what I don't want is I don't want like a harsh line where I made a mask and I can now see a photo bleach line. That would be really bad to me. So in general, I want to do an entire page. But if I center the light and I put it close over the, let's say a stain, then I'll get a gradual fade, just like you see the fade from purple to yellow here, and where it's impossible to put your finger on a point here and say, okay, that's yellow now, not purple, right? There is no one point in that fade. And that's going to be my goal with blue light, with photo bleaching, is to make sure that you can't point to a spot and say, well, this is where the photo bleaching started, right? So that's why I would do it that way. But other thoughts here?
I mean, I'd agree with you. I don't really have anything to add there.
No, I'm of the same mind.
All right. What's a good heat press to get? So we've talked about this. There's been a lot of conversation in the community about this. There's a lot of conversation in other Facebook groups about cleaning and pressing. The one that gets pointed to on a regular basis for being a high quality. So actually, let me back up. There's two schools here. The first school with the lowest barrier to entry are the t-shirt presses manufactured in China. And they run the gamut. You can buy them for $150 up to $250, maybe even almost $300. Some are better than others. Just like anything that you have manufactured in China, a lot of the outcome depends on your quality control and your quality assurance of the process. The one that keeps rising to the top among this first category is Tusy or Tusy, Tusy. and you can buy them off of Amazon. They're mid-priced. They're a little bit under 200, I believe, last time I looked. But they're about as high quality as you can find there, and being mid-priced, they're kind of priced correctly. So that's the one that I recommend to people, especially if they want a low barrier to entry. They're not 100% sure they want to clean and press books. They want to try, just give it a try. Well, here's an entry around, $200. And I do have in my my Amazon affiliate page, I do have a link to the 2C, so it's right there, and that's the one I recommend if that's where you're at.
Yeah. So real quick on that. So I have a 2C. I think I paid $180 for it. And I've done thousands of comics on it by this point. I've had it for 2 years. It's just now starting to get a little bit loose. In some areas that I can't really quite figure out. My next one would be a little bit more of a pricier one. But let me say this too, that you can get it in 3 different sizes, a 12 by 12, 12 by 15, 15 by 15. I bought a 15 by 15 thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to press 2 comics at a time. I bet you I've never pressed 2 comics at a time more than twice. Okay. If it's a little bit cheaper for you to do like a 12 by 15 or something like that, you don't need the biggest one. Okay. Think about what you are wanting to use it for, because a folded out page fits in a 12 by 15. And I also have the one that's the lift up lid. You can do the
clamshell.
The clamshell one. I have heard that those have a tendency to break a little bit more. Rick had one where the lid slid, turned, and he said that mechanism of the turning did end up giving out, and so he now has a press that
I think the clamshell is kind of accepted as the better way to go. Rather than the arm rollout one. The other
that's all my knowledge on that. So
the other category of presses is, the professionals typically are buying a laminating press, a vintage one most of the time. And Seal was one of the major companies that made those in America here.
Right above my finger here.
Yeah, I've got 3 Seals myself. I will tell you that unless you're working at the professional level, don't feel you need to get a Seal. You need practice more than you need the absolute best equipment available. I would definitely find, if I just wanted to find out, do I have an interest in this? Do I have an aptitude, etc.? I would just go ahead and get myself the 2C. And, if you're really active in comic pressing, you're going to need a second press anyway. And if you're really obsessed with it, you can make your second one a Seal. The Seals are workhorses. They're very uniform in temperature. You can get a lot of pressure out of them. They are tougher to adjust. It's just more time consuming, a lot more. And so like, for example, if you're going back and forth between Silver Age and Golden Age books, or, square bound books, etc., it's a major pain in the bottom. Again, professionals, they can set up several Seals and have one for Golden Age if they work on that regularly, etc. Or they can figure out, well, they have ways of, they're also, they're working full time adjusting those. I kind of want to set it and forget it with my Seal. So what I end up doing actually is many of my Golden Age books, especially early ones, the big 68-page ones, they actually get pressed in my original inexpensive Chinese t-shirt press. Just because I don't want to hassle. My Seal is set up to do Silver Age books, and I can do bronze from there and modern. And I also can do late Golden Age, what I technically think of as Atomic Age. Because they're closer to Silver Age size than early Golden Age. But anyway, to each his own. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat. There's some thoughts on that. Here's a question from Ron Gann, who has his own YouTube channels, doing great work, by the way. This is the comic, help me on the pronunciation, Craftician. The comic book Craftician here on YouTube. Check him out. He's also on our Facebook group. At what junction is it best to humidify covers and wraps? I understand the reassembled book should be humidified some 24 hours prior to refolding in the hot press. Are there any other times, such as prior to photo bleaching, maybe? I think this is a great question. I don't think we'll probably have consensus among everybody, but I will give you my thoughts first, and I'd love to hear from my co-hosts here. So I humidify a lot. I use humidity a lot. I will rarely recommend putting a book for a full 24 hours, though. I'll do that sometimes for a spine roll reversal, because I want every wrap all the way through to be good and wet so that the set on the new fold takes. But most of the time, if you're working on the cover, you only need about maybe 2 hours in the humidity chamber. And that'll humidify the cover well enough for you to do any work that you're trying to do on the cover. So if you're just doing cover work, I would stick with about a 2 to 4 hour in the humidity chamber. If you are spine roll reversal, or if you have one of those crunches that goes through every single wrap all the way through a book, and you've got to press every single page, then longer will be fine. Be careful with longer periods of humidity. More saturated paper has more water that needs to be pushed out of it during the press and the heat. And if you use SRP, silicone release paper, it's more or less impervious to water, and it can actually get trapped in the paper and cause cockling and other issues because it expands the paper. So if you do longer periods in your humidity box, please use paper and not SRP for your stack. Now, that's part one of the question. Second part is, I do use it for other things. I do use it for photo bleaching. So, there's lots of videos on my channel about photo bleaching and how it's been done for actually literally centuries. It was not invented in the last 3 years, despite what some people would have you believe. There was some great work in the 80s done defining which wavelengths can be used to bleach paper without damaging ink. And, that's been elaborated on. All credit to the crew, the Captain Mike crew that put out the recent book on I'll call it photo bleaching and stain removal. They use different terminology that's a little less harsh in terms of, I think, they don't want to scare people away with the photo bleaching, but that's in fact what it is. That is, I'm on record saying that's the best practical guide on doing it. But, like I said, there's a whole literature on this. There's been a bunch of papers published in the conservation literature going back literally decades. The wavelengths were figured out a long time ago, and it literally goes back centuries. Now, we go back to the earliest work. The Dutch were literally taking paper and they were soaking it in a solution of water from hard water from a limestone creek. And then they were adding a little bit of sour milk, which is a base. And then they were putting it out to dry in crofting fields to be exposed to sunlight. So traditionally, photo bleaching is done with water, concurrent with a solution, a basic solution typically. I found that although the Captain Mike book calls for, a number of different ways to do it, you could do it dry, you can mist water or hydrogen peroxide onto it, you can do an overlay, and we had Jim Wolgert on to talk about some of that stuff. And again, I think it's a great practical guide that should be, in my opinion, your starting point, though, not your ending point in your journey of photo bleaching. So all that to say, what do I do these days? I often put a book in the humidity chamber for 2 to 4 hours, and then I photo bleach for 2 hours with blue light, and then I'll put it back in the humidity chamber for a couple hours, and I'll do maybe 3 cycles of that. And I have not done a side-by-side to tell you definitively that it works better or faster than dry photo bleaching, but there's enough in the literature and there's enough experience with others doing misting and overlays that I believe it does work better. And that's why I do it. I'm a hobbyist, so it's simple for me to just put 2-hour cycles and flip books back and forth between the humidity chamber and the blue light if I want to do that. And that's what I do. That was a long answer, so hopefully my co-hosts are still awake, but I'd love to hear from either of you on this subject. There are other places where I use humidity, but I'll take a break and let you guys chime in.
Shelby, if you want to go first.
Yeah, mine's pretty quick. I mean, I agree with everything that Paul said. Severe spine rolls, I will humidify that and then lay the book flat and try to flatten it first and then rehumidify it to do the fold, put the fold back. So there is a humidity, then a heat press, and then humidity, fold, then heat press again, right? I was just recently, so now to piggyback on what Paul just said, I was just recently reading some literature about photo bleaching. And while they did not say why, Paul might could answer it. All their photo bleaching experiments they were doing was on wet paper. And again, they didn't go into an explanation of why. Maybe it's just common knowledge within the conservator or that community that you should always photo bleach with wet paper. I have only started doing that recently because Paul suggested it to me, and I have gotten better results than trying to photo bleach dry paper. So that's it.
My answer is going to be just short and sweet. And I don't think I've actually shown this yet, but I have nothing to hide, and I think it's a great tool. And I think, honestly, if you're looking for like a fast, easy way to humidify something, then look no further than the thing that you see right next to me every time we do one of these shows.
The Fogmaster 6000.
My ultrasonic humidifier, which sounds so fancy, but really, it really isn't. It's delivering a nice, cool, cold mist of water, so you're not worrying about like hot, steaming water affecting the paper in a negative way. You can pick one of these up for, you know what, I honestly can't remember exactly how much it was. I want to say it was somewhere between $180 and $250. Worth it for an investment, because what this allows you to do, if you're proficient in really disassembling books, but you can use it on a book that's totally assembled too. You can use this to direct humidity just at where the spine is if you're trying to do a spinal reversal. I mean, part of the catch is that oftentimes you need to press the whole book anyway. So if you're just humidifying just the spine and you remove the roll, then you'll look and be like, oh man, I still have to do the... So it comes with a caveat, but for so many things, just for spot humidification, if you just want to humidify an area to remove some creases or something, this tool is just that, a great tool to have.
But you have to get this one. There are inexpensive ones that actually spit water out. And use different technologies. So beware of like cheap imitations of, you need the ultrasonic one.
Before I bought this, I tried to make one because I was trying to be cheap. I'm not kidding. And what I did was I used one of the handheld clothes steamers that you'll see prevalently used in the humidifying comics world. If you're not using one of those, you're using one of the plastic bins with water in it that you're leaving the book in for duration, right? But I got one of the handheld ones, and I basically I tried to use like with rubber bands and a whole tube system to do it, And the issue I encountered was exactly what you said. You had water spurting out, and it was
Yeah.
even with this. If you don't know how to maintain the hose line, you'll have water that starts to drip out because this is technically made to be used directly with the humidification chamber that they sell at PEL. Preservation. That's where I picked this up from. So
Sure. Yeah.
You're using it kind of as a secondary use aside from its primary use. But once you get, like, it took me a minute to kind of get used to this where I wasn't, because I had this and I was holding it over a book and I started to have water dripping, which is a big issue. And I figured out how to solve it just by how you have this kind of hang down low. So you're going to have some water kind of accumulate in the tube over time.
Yeah,
so
that's why there's a long hose on it. Yeah.
It's like driving an old car. It has like, you kind of got to know how to drive it. But it's a great tool. I highly recommend getting one of these.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I was just mentioning to Paul last week. I said, I wonder how many people know that that's a humidifier that sits on Phil's
I assumed
desk.
it was a CPAP machine or something. No, I knew what it was.
But yeah, Pale is a British company, and I've ordered a lot of products from them. I think the tweezers you show are Pale. They're super great. They are in Britain, but pretty economical. And British people do everything better. So, and I do use a hand steamer sometimes. You've probably seen it on my channel for just basic cleaning and pressing, right? Where I'm not breaking apart a big book and things like that. Also, I want to make one quick comment, Paul, and then I think you and I were just talking about this. You don't need to use boiling water in your tub. You don't. Okay, just warm tap water is fine.
That wasn't what Ron asked, but yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there about how to create the humidity chamber. You don't need distilled water at all. Ions in your water are not going to enter the gas phase and hurt your book somehow. So save your money, stop using distilled water, use regular water. It doesn't need to be boiling. You need to maintain your bin, but I actually use one of the antifungals that we talked about when the professor was on.
Can I ask a question to be devil's
advocate? And I leave my chamber set up essentially indefinitely. Actually, there's some weird stuff that happens environmentally where you can get condensation inside it, and after that happens, I'll clean it. But other than that, it stays assembled and it's always ready to go, and it's always ambient 98% humidity. Yes, please, Phil.
If so, just to be devil's advocate, if you use the distilled water, would you still have to use the antifungal, or would the fact that it was
you do still you could fungus will still grow in distilled water anyway. I think it's just a lack of understanding of basic chemistry and science, and what you could call look, we could do a whole nother show on this. I'm also on record saying you should not be using distilled water on your comic books. Why? Distilled water. Do you guys know you can't? So if you drank distilled water and nothing else, you would actually kill yourself.
Yeah.
Right? For the same reason that it's bad for paper, it's bad for humans, because it doesn't have ions in it. So when it enters your body, it literally strips your body of calcium and sodium that you need for literally your heart to pump, right? And so distilled water, just like salt water, would kill you. Now, can you drink a little bit of distilled water? Of course you can, just like you can drink a little bit of salt water. But if you tried to survive on that, you would literally die. So why shouldn't you use it on paper? The exact same reason. Paper is made, and the cellulose fibers are bonded together in the presence of water with ions. There's calcium, there's other ions present. They're stabilizing the paper matrix. There's water content in paper. Even dry paper is like 18% water, sometimes more, right? Some of the mass of any piece of paper at any moment, some percentage of the mass of this notebook or this note card is water. Okay. So you introduce distilled water, it strips these ions out, those ions were stabilizing the matrix. They were stabilizing it physically and chemically. So now you've made the paper less stable physically and chemically. You've made it less permanent, and you've damaged the paper. Now, if you don't understand science and you don't have a background in science, you might say, well, I'm being conservative. I don't want any chemicals to be in there, so I use distilled water. And, you know, I'm sure it was the belief and the people that are teaching this, it was born out of a reverence for the comic and a misguided perception that they don't want to introduce anything into the comic book. But in fact, they're stripping things away from the comic book. So I need to do a whole video on this. But Jim Wolgert came out recently after he and I talked about this. So you know me, I'm a bridge builder.
I saw what
if I do confront somebody, I do it, you know, in private, right? So, but when we had Jim on, I said, look, I think, you know, the book with Captain Mike is great, and this stain removal and whitening book, and you know, I have a couple of issues with it though. And I just want to address it privately with you, because I'm not here to call you out on the channel. That's not how I operate. I said, I got a big problem with recommending that people use distilled water for hop and these other methods. Gotcha. And he said, I completely agree with you. This was where, you know, the guys and I could not reach consensus, and, you know, they published the book that way, and I disagree with them. Yeah. And then shortly after I had that conversation with him, he came out publicly saying, basically, like, a mea culpa, like, I was wrong. I went along and I did recommend distilled water, and I was wrong about it. It's bad for comic books. It's bad for paper. And of course, I supported him publicly when he did that. But I need to do just a video on that and talk about that. So that said, I think in a related note, similarly, the you know, Captain Mike had a huge influence. His books have had a huge influence on our hobby, and out of, I'm sure, what was a reverence for the book and abundance of caution, but a lack of understanding of sort of thermodynamics and chemistry, recommended using distilled water so that nothing bad could get into the comic books. But you know, again, in tap water, you don't have chemicals. Well, not in normal tap water, maybe Flint's, but in normal tap water, you don't have chemicals that are volatilizing and entering the gas phase and touching your comic. So you just don't need distilled water. It's just, you're wasting money, essentially. You know, if you have really hard water and you don't want calcium deposits in the bottom of your box after a couple years, I mean, by all means, use distilled water. Do what you want. But
for viewers, though, would you clarify?
Do it because you want to do it, not because you have some belief that using something other than distilled water is bad for your comic books.
Like deionized water would be a better alternative to distilled
DI
water.
is better, yeah. And again, we could do a whole show just on that. I do want to say here, one other time when conservators use humidity is prior to an aqueous bath. Pages are usually humidified in gas phase, so they're put in a humidity chamber prior to aqueous bath, usually. And you'll notice in my videos, I often do that. I don't always show it because it's kind of boring, but I will often humidify pages before they go into full submersion bath. So that's another time in which I use humidity. A lot of and there are other specific instances as well, but I think that's enough for tonight. What do you guys think?
And that's to help it accept the water a little bit easier, because like when you pour the water on a dry wrap, you can see that it doesn't readily take the water, right? But what you're saying is having the humidity already applied. Now there's moisture already there, so it accepts.
The idea is
the bath
exactly. Better. So, you know, the paper is mild, the comic book paper sized, and so it's mildly hydrophobic, but eventually paper will overcome the hydrophobicity and then it will saturate, right? The idea here is that you've got a head start on overcoming the hydrophobicity, and therefore your exposure times can be more controlled and shorter. And that's the idea. Again, in the conservation literature, it's not even really discussed. It's just a given that you're gonna humidify pages before you do an aqueous bath on them, right? That's just understood. It's that standard. The professor says bottled water's okay. Bottled water's perfect. Yeah. He says it's basically tap water minus the chlorine. That would be true if you're in a city with chlorinated water. Yeah. I live out in the country, and I got me a well, and my well water chlorine. But
you got that chlorine city water.
Yeah. If you don't use city water, yeah. But yeah, there it is. All right. Well, I think we've yammered on long enough. What do you guys think?
Yeah, we're
really yammered out.
We haven't put everybody to sleep. We still have the professors awake at least. So thank you everybody that joined us this week. Especially thanks, and I didn't mention at the top of the show, I should have. Thanks for those viewing through Shelby's Comics. We are simulcasting with Shelby's Comics tonight. So thank you for joining us. If you joined us wherever you joined us, or if you're watching this on demand later, we appreciate you. And until next time, take care of one another. Want to see us out, Shelby?
All right. Hey, thank you all for joining us tonight. Hope you have had a great weekend and you have a great week. But with that, Jack's over here in a box. We're going to say peace, love, and comics. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Nice.